Hi, I'm Brandon. I own a drywall company in Denver called Black Quill Construction. I do strictly patchwork of drywall, plaster, and texture. And today I decided I'm going to make my first how-to video of how to do drywall. Bear with me, I'm not a professional videographer, so my editing skills are not great, but my drywall skills are excellent. So we're here in my house. This is going to be for a smooth finish wall. This is probably the fastest repair that you're going to find on YouTube. And I'll walk you through replacing drywall, patching, and retexturing, but there is no texture here, it's smooth, so sanding. And yeah, anyway, let's get started. We're going to need a hole. So, maybe we need a bigger hole. That's a pretty good hole. All right. My wife isn't here. She probably wouldn't find this very hilarious, but I'm going to go ahead and get some wood pieces cut to put in there for backing, and I'll be back. Okay, I've got wood pieces here. You can use really any kind of scrap wood as long as it fits within the hole and gives you a little bit on the extra on the sides. Some guys go nuts with squaring up holes. I don't really see any need to do that because it's all going to get filled in and covered up anyway. So in here we've got insulation, studs are back there. I'm just kind of doing this so I can get the wood in a little bit easier. Sometimes, if you're close enough to a stud, I'll trim it back into the wood so that you can split the difference and use that wood to use for backing. All right, so we've got some wood pieces I'm going to use. Grab my drill. And some screws. Just standard drywall screws, 1.25 inches. I take the wood, try to get bracing on both sides with just a little bit showing on the face. Run a screw in the top, top is secure. Run a screw in the bottom, bottom is secure. Do it on both sides. And that'll give you adequate backing to put a new piece of drywall in there. Okay, tidy that up with a touch, and grab a piece of drywall. Okay, here is a piece, oversized. Again, you don't have to go nuts with making it perfectly sized. I trim it approximately just where it'll fix or fill the area. And if you are using a razor knife, which is what I use, be careful, obviously, very sharp, and you will be missing digits. And let's see here. Oh, yeah. All right, we're pretty close. So, trim that. Get these cut in to where we've got a moderately accurate piece. Okay, a couple more screws. I'll put 4 more screws in here. 3 at least. This top piece came loose over here. There we go. Your drywall is reinstalled, re-secured. Don't worry about these gaps as long as they're not giant. Like if they're bigger than 1 inch, you probably should have a little bit more drywall in there, but if it's in a spot that's not going to be getting any weight put on it, or like, I don't know, something installed like a TV or something. That would be kind of a problem to have some dead space, but for what we're doing, not a big deal. I use ultra thin fiberglass mesh tape, which is, in my opinion, especially in smooth walls, the ultra thin, it's about half the width of the standard fiberglass tape, so that when you go to finish it and sand it, it just has a lot less depth to it. So I take and I run basically across every area you can see here. You just cover all the holes, and you try to catch a little bit on both sides of each piece of drywall. That's another good tell if you don't have enough rock. If it's not big enough for one piece to fit over the joint, you probably need to have a little bit bigger piece in there. Okay, so this is retaped. Now I'm going to get mud. For this, I'm going to use 5-minute mud. I'll grab the bag and show you what that looks like. Okay, so what I've got here is 5-minute easy sand mud. It sets up in about 5 minutes. Most guys don't even use it just because it cures too quickly to work with, but for a spot this small, it's perfect. I use a 6-inch putty knife and get it to the consistency where it's shapeable and kind of smushable, but it's not too stiff and also not too loose. I take and get a depth of mud on there. You can see how it stays. Get it, press it in so that it fills that void behind the tape, essentially creating a new piece of drywall. And then you just kind of fill all the joints in, make sure it's, and you don't have to go nuts squishing it in there, but you do want to make sure there's some in there. And then I'll take a little bit bigger knife. This is a 10. Run right over the top of it and just kind of bring everything to semi-level. This is the first coat on a wall like this. Usually smooth requires at least 2 coats. If you're a good finisher, you can usually do it in 2. It also depends on the depth of the hole and just kind of how the mud hangs inside your patch. We'll call that good for 1. When I finish, my knives are curved. You can see it's got a very slight U shape to it. The edges are pointed out. You try to, without squishing in convex, you want to make sure and try and get the surface as level as possible, but utilizing that curved edge to try and get that edge as thin as possible, because that'll make either sanding, which I don't do much of, or what we're going to do today is wet sponge. So you want to make sure you have tight edges, not big, heavy, thick lines on the edges. Now I'm going to get rid of this mud, and I'll cut out the unnecessary part of waiting for me to clean up my pan and then also mix up another pan. But let me get rid of this mud and clean up, and I will be back. All right, so we've got our first coat on here, and this stuff sets up, again, they say it's 5-minute mud. It really gets to a firm point probably in about 5 to 6 minutes, but as you can see where the joints are, it starts to kind of bag out. It's just the mud is kind of fighting gravity a little bit and pushing out. As it cures up, I take my 6-inch knife and use the inner curved side, and it's curved. I don't know if you can see it, but it's like the other knives. It's pointed out one direction, and that helps keep from making lines as you're doing finishing. I come over it as it's curing, and if you catch it just right, you'll kind of be able to smash any of those humped out lines down. And then I take a wet sponge. This is in lieu of sanding because I hate sanding. And very lightly, very gently go at the edges and make sure that the edges just go away. And I've got a little bit of tape hanging here. Pull that out. Not a big deal. Until I start getting junk in my mud. But again, not a huge deal. It's all sandable. You try not to do any more sanding than you have to, but that's how it goes. Okay, I'm gonna go mix another pan of mud. By the time I've got that mixed, this will be ready to hit again. This is ready for a second coat after about 7 or 8 minutes. So I will be right back. Okay. Mixing up pan number 2. You don't need much. If you buy the bagged mud, it goes a long way. I mean, unless you've got a lot of damage, you might try to get the smallest container you can, because the big bags, they'll do a lot. And for something like this, I mean, I mix a teeny little bit, like probably 1/10 of a pan. All right, making sure we're smooth. Good to go. Done with the 6. Big knife only now. And you want to just go beyond that original perimeter just slightly, maybe a couple inches, just enough to where you can spread it. A good rule of thumb is the further you spread it, the flatter you can make everything look. However, it's not always necessary to go super wide with your finishing. You can see little things pop up like this, little divots. It's just revealing the uneven spots. Now, this is probably the trickiest part for most people, is working mud. For me, I've done it for so long that it's just second nature. But you want to give just enough pressure on your knife to flatten it out and not have your knife at a 90 degree angle, because I have always found that if you have it at more of a 45 and you can control the pressure, and it gives, everybody's probably different muscle-wise how that feels natural, but that's what works best for me. And then I'll find any little stragglers on the edges and just tune that up. This is great. Okay, so we're about 98% smooth here. You see a couple little ugly spots. And then I start messing with it, and then I see more and more spots because I'm making more and more spots here. But that is just about perfect. Okay, so we're gonna let this cure up just like the last one. I'll hit the edges again with a sponge, and then it's gonna be dryer time. I'll break out the hand dryer, get this thing dried up. Might do just a teeny tiny little bit of touch-up sanding, and then it's gonna be ready for paint. Okay, now second coat is on. It's curing. I'm gonna go at the edges again with the sponge a little bit, very lightly. You don't need to push hard. It'll tell you if you're pushing too hard because you start getting lines on the surface. So that basically does it. A couple little inconsistencies you can catch with the sponge and get lucky. If you start making lines in the mud, it's best to just wait and run over it with a sander very lightly, just to make sure you get that nice finish on it before you paint. But just like I did. Okay, I am going to break out the dryer. Just use a industrial hand dryer. Just standard heavy duty stuff. And very gently and carefully surface dry this. If you hold it and focus too much on one spot for too long, you're going to bubble the paint beneath it, and then you're going to have to do more finishing, because you start getting paint bubbles. You have to scrape those off, put mud over those, and then start all over again. Not completely over, but on that spot. So you'll start to see it turn white, and basically I'll spend the next 6 minutes or so doing this, and then I will cut back when this is dry, so I don't bore you to death. Okay, everything is dry enough to sand now. It's super smooth, but the very deepest parts of the mud where the tape was, where there were gaps between the drywall, that's the deepest part that it's got mud on, so it's taking it longer to dry, which is totally common. As long as it's about 90% dry, it's sandable and it will paint just fine. So I'm just going to do a little bit of touch-up sanding on the edges here. And I like to run plastic on the floor with a piece of tape across the top, and that catches everything that falls. And I mean, we're not doing a crazy amount of sanding here either. I'm just pressing very lightly, just kind of catching any edges so they don't show when we paint it. And once this is sufficiently smooth, which you can see with your eye, and more importantly, you can feel with your hand. Once that's done, we can go ahead and paint it. When I do textured walls, which is almost every surface, it's very rare to find, at least where I live, it's very rare to find smooth on walls. I can use the wet sponge on almost everything, and that's an adequate way to finish your edges. When you're working with a smooth wall, it really does have to be sanded smooth, a little bit at least, just to get it smooth enough where it's not going to show when it's painted. But if it's a textured surface, as long as your edges are finished well, you can sponge those in adequately. And that's not going to be in this video. I'll do another video. When I'm on site somewhere and I have a patch that needs textured, I will do a totally separate video for that. Okay, let me go grab the paint and we're going to get this painted. All right, today's color is agreeable gray, so it's all very exciting. Okay, and on first coat, you try not to do a ton of back rolling, which is when you apply the paint and then try to blend it in with the spot that you've already rolled. Try not to do a ton of back rolling, catch any lines if there's obvious lines, and move on. And then you want to get the first coat on without over rolling. It's just the mud does weird stuff if you introduce a new moisture to it. So you re-wetten the mud and then it kind of wants to be malleable again. So be careful with that. It's usually not a problem with smooth. It's mostly an issue if you've got texture, because then that can flatten out. But I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not, but the patch is already starting to dry. It's soaking the paint up like a sponge. This is also a super thin napped roller, so it's not putting a lot of paint on. This was just a spare that I had laying around. So get this painted and try not to create lines. Just kind of dry roll your edges. I'll push them out. Right now I'm just kind of going sloppy, but we'll let this cure up for a couple minutes. I might even run a little heat on it. Get this back to where I can put a second coat on it. And then I will be back in a couple minutes. Okay, we're back again. Had to take a little bit of an unplanned detour there. The guy that flipped this house before we bought it used just garbage tier paint, and I got a brand new can mixed up this morning of decent paint, and the bases were different enough that the paint it didn't have a perfect match, so I had to repaint the full wall. It's like 90% dry, but anyway, patch is done. Everything is back to smooth, and everything is like it never happened. I may not even tell my wife I did this, but if you have any questions or comments or anything, leave them in the comment section. And I'm new to the whole YouTube thing, so I will figure it out. Hopefully I can edit this together where it doesn't look like a piece of garbage. Thanks for watching.